Thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. I've got it back together. This is the lesser prairie chicken. It's adorable, right? I think this is the lesser prairie chicken while dating. I think this is like lesser prairie chicken showing off, making the moves. Lesser prairie chicken is not actually a chicken. Technically, it's a grouse. But still, obviously, very cute. And if you're another grouse, probably very sexy. The lesser prairie chicken. This is Senator Rand Paul, the lesser prairie senator from the state of Kentucky. Senator Paul right now is in hour number 8 of one of his patented, not exactly a filibusters. In so doing, Senator Paul is providing today, I believe, a great public service in terms of illuminating what does and doesn't get the luxury of political attention in this country. Senator Paul is doing that today, and I have to tell you, so is the aforementioned lesser prairie chicken. This is Congresswoman Jackie Speier of California. Now, you see there's another guy sitting right next to her, sitting right off her left elbow there. That guy looks like an unrelated bystander to what Jackie Speier is about to do. But keep your eye on him, because he has a very important job here that he does not seem all that psyched about. Watch.
One of our most solemn duties in Congress is dealing with emerging national security threats. We eliminated bin Laden. We're making progress in weakening ISIL. And unfortunately, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have alerted us to a new threat emerging deep in the heart of the western United States, a sort of feathery sleeper cell that just can't wait to disrupt our way of life. What is inspiring so much fear? The lesser prairie chicken. Listening to this debate, you'd think that the lesser prairie chicken was single-handedly providing aid and comfort to the enemy, not just living on the prairie and doing the occasional little dance.
I love that C-SPAN has to widen the shot for the poor staffer who's kind of like wiping his nose, pretending he's not really doing it. The poor staffer whose job it is to hold up the picture of the lesser prairie chicken armed with a grenade launcher. Chicken Qaeda. The Chiclamic State. What Jackie Speier and her beleaguered staffer did in that stunt, what they're doing that stunt about, is the fact that Republicans in Congress decided this year that the defense bill would be an excellent hook, a convenient, pointless legislative hold-all into which they could stuff all sorts of things that have nothing to do with defense, even though it's the defense bill. Republicans, particularly the excitable Kansas Congressman Tim Huelskamp, apparently are very upset with the lesser prairie chicken. Other Republicans apparently have it out for a different lesser-known animal. It's this guy, the American burying beetle. And for a variety of reasons, Republicans decided this year that the defense bill would be a great way to get the American burying beetle and the lesser prairie chicken banned from getting any sort of federal protection. They thought they should do that stuff in the defense bill because who would dare vote against something as important as the defense bill? So let's just stick all this chicken and beetle stuff and anything else we can find into the defense bill and pass it that way. Because who cares about the defense bill? Who cares what's in it? This week, the capital of Anbar province in Iraq, as well as one of Iraq's most archaeologically important cities, they both fell to ISIS. American troops are engaged in an air war, of course, against ISIS, both in Iraq and in Syria, but ISIS made dramatic gains in Iraq this week. This past weekend, American Delta Force commandos put boots on the ground inside Syria. They flew in Black Hawk helicopters and raided an ISIS leader's compound in Syria. They apparently engaged in some pretty intense on-the-ground fighting there. They killed the ISIS leader, and they took his wife as a prisoner. You might remember everybody talking about how much everybody agreed that there would be no boots on the ground in Syria. There were U.S. boots on the ground this past week in Syria. The air war, U.S. air war and the coalition air war against ISIS continues. It's in its 8th month now. The U.S. portion of this air war, which is the Lions portion of the air war, it involves thousands of U.S. troops, including one F-18 crew that had to be rescued from the waters of the Persian Gulf recently after their fighter jet crashed into the sea after taking off from a U.S. aircraft carrier. The war that the United States military is waging against ISIS in Iraq and Syria is dangerous, it is complex, it is expensive. To the extent that it counts on Iraqi ground troops to be able to do most of the fighting against ISIS on their own soil and on their own terms. Well, this week, as ISIS took the Anbar province city of Ramadi. When that happened this week, once again, Iraqi troops on the ground turned and ran in the face of those ISIS fighters advancing. The Iraqi government is mostly Shiite. The Iraqi army is mostly Shiite. The Iranian-trained militias, who Iraq hopes will be able to do the fighting against ISIS on the ground, they're also Shiite. But ISIS is Sunni, and so is the population of most of Anbar province, which is where ISIS just took over the capital city. Now, one Sunni sheikh is directly lobbying the U.S. Congress, asking for the U.S. Congress to start arming and supporting the Sunni tribes in Anbar directly instead of U.S. support going through the Iraqi government, which they say is Shiite and isn't doing anything to protect them at all. And so they'd like to deal with the U.S. Congress and the U.S. government directly. So whether or not you see that as complicated, it is undoubtedly difficult, right? I mean, there's a lot to argue about in terms of the strategy, in terms of the cost, in terms of whether or not what we are doing there as a war effort is working, whether we should be doing something else instead, if anything, right? There's a lot to debate. But there's also the lesser prairie chicken. And that's more important to Congress. Because even as they put that prairie chicken and that poor little burying beetle thing, even as they put them into the defense bill, Congress this past week decided that the defense bill would be a completely inappropriate place to waste time voting on or even talking about our ongoing war against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. I mean, in terms of having this is a nitty-gritty thing. This is a specific thing. It's not an abstract concept. In terms of having some political attention, some national debate about national defense, in Congress, there is room in that debate for the lesser prairie chicken, but not for the war, which led to Congressman Jim McGovern blowing his top in Congress in one of the greater things I have seen from the floor of the House in months, if not years.
I don't know what we're doing in Afghanistan, or what we're doing in Iraq again, or what we're doing in Syria now, if it isn't supposedly in the name of the national defense of our country. I mean, this is the bill considered by the Armed Services Committee. If this is not an appropriate place to talk about war, you know, and all the military equipment we're sending halfway around the world, then I don't know what bill is appropriate. We are told over and over and over again that these are inappropriate vehicles to talk about war. This is the Armed Services Committee. This is the National Defense Authorization Act. This is the bill. This funds the wars. So, I mean, this notion that it doesn't belong here, well, where the hell does it belong? This is important stuff, and we treat war as if it's nothing. We have men and women in harm's way, and we don't even debate whether or not the mission is something that we support or not. This is ridiculous. This is disgraceful.
Congressman Jim McGovern, this is disgraceful. And now today, in the Senate, it's Rand Paul. Senator Rand Paul, declared candidate for the Republican nomination for president. Today, he took to the Senate floor at 1:18 p.m. Eastern Time with a chest-pounding email from his office saying that he would be there for a long time. He sent out a fundraising email as he took the Senate floor. The fundraising email said, quote, "I will not back down. I will not yield 1 inch in this fight so long as my legs can stand." A spokeswoman said at the same time that he will speak until he can no longer speak. And so Senator Paul has been there for about 8 hours already today. I mean, to be clear, he has not been continuously speaking the whole time, and he has, water and stuff. Politico reports that he just got himself some treats from the Senate candy desk. I certainly hope so. Keep your blood sugar up. Several senators from both parties have also joined him throughout the day so that Senator Paul can take a break without technically ceding the floor, but he doesn't have to keep speaking the whole time. They've started speaking in his stead to give him time for a little rest. Again, senators from both parties doing that. But Senator Paul is technically holding the floor with what is technically a long speech. Senator Paul's beef today, the reason he is doing this is that he says Congress is pushing through the reauthorization of the Patriot Act without sufficient debate. He wants the Patriot Act to not be reauthorized, but either way, he wants it fully debated.
At the very least, we should debate. We should debate whether or not we are going to relinquish our rights or whether or not we are going to have a full and able debate over whether or not we can live within the Constitution or whether or not we have to go around the Constitution. Some have said it's too late. It's too late to even get this back. There have been articles written in the last few weeks that say whether the Patriot Act expires or not, the government will just keep on doing what they're doing. Now, Article 2 gives the president of the executive branch different powers. What is sad about this, what's going on now, is that Congress hasn't shown, I think, sufficient interest in what the executive branch does on a host of things.
Senator Paul is right, of course, that Congress has constitutional authority for making decisions about war. It's not the president's prerogative, it's Congress's prerogative, constitutionally speaking. Congress is not asserting that prerogative, not just on matters that derive from the president's war powers or things that have been done in the name of things that seem like war, even if they're not declared as war. I mean, the issue of Congress abrogating its powers on matters related to war is true directly on the war itself, let alone these other Patriot Act provisions that at least in some sense theoretically derive from the president's powers to wage war. I mean, you can get to extrapolatable distance, right, from the constitutional point that Rand Paul is making about the Patriot Act. But on the matter of the war itself, that's not being debated either. That is being excluded explicitly from the votes on defense bills that the Congress has been taking over the last 2 weeks. But as Rand Paul holds the floor tonight and raises money in this one-man debate on the Patriot Act, it seems like it's important to point out that he is not actually filibustering the Patriot Act itself tonight. He is not technically filibustering anything. What he delayed today by holding the floor was discussion and voting on amendments to the trade bill. The trade bill is scheduled for a vote in the Senate at midday tomorrow, which is the next thing the Senate is supposed to do. So if Senator Rand Paul can hold out overnight until noon tomorrow, he could succeed in delaying that one vote on the trade bill, at least for some amount of time. But that's the best he could aim for in terms of what he is technically going to accomplish here. He's not actually going to change anything about the Patriot Act here. His actions will have no effect on that. He's not filibustering that. He's not even starting his speech while the Patriot Act was on the floor. So this is a pointed and undoubtedly tiring political stunt that he is pulling today to draw attention to Congress abrogating its responsibilities to debate and act on national security issues. And he is making this stand at a time when Congress really does have a terribly serious and direct problem with that. But materially, what he is doing tonight will not affect either the Patriot Act, about which he is speaking, or the actual war, which is still nowhere near anyone's agenda except for the troops who are fighting it and have been already for 8 months, with Congress not saying beep about it. Joining us now from the Capitol is Frank Thorpe. He's NBC News Capitol Hill producer. Frank, it's really nice to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So I understand that Senator Paul is still on the Senate floor. Do you have any expectation for how long this could go on?
Well, they haven't said, obviously, but we're expecting him to go until at least after midnight. And the reality is, though, you know, you had mentioned that he wasn't actually going to be affecting the FISA bill. I mean, if he goes past midnight tonight, Senator McConnell was actually trying to start the process for getting onto the USA Freedom Act. The USA Freedom Act was the House bill that passed with 338 votes last week that would take the bulk collection of telephone metadata and move it from being stored with the government and instead have the telephone companies store it instead. And so Senator McConnell wanted to start the process to get that vote going. And if Senator Rand Paul actually goes past midnight tonight, he won't be able to do that. He will only be able to do that tomorrow. So technically, you know, his speech on the floor could, in fact, delay the consideration of that bill, but it only adds a day to the calendar. It only makes the prospect of being here over the weekend even greater.
In terms of that potential delay, that being basically the nuclear consequence that he could cause by what he's doing, how do his fellow senators feel about that, and what are their options?
Well, I mean, you know, a lot of the senators just say, you know, this is his prerogative to speak out against the FISA provisions that he opposes. You know, Senator John Thune, I asked him specifically this question, and he said, well, I'd rather him do it now than do it on the weekend. Because, as you had mentioned, he's doing this speech on the trade bill. If he really wanted to filibuster or delay the FISA bill, he could actually go ahead and speak on the FISA bill. So what's happening now is he's going to speak. We're still going to have votes tomorrow. He has to stop by noon tomorrow at the latest. It would be impressive if he were to be able to make it that far, but it's unclear if he'll be able to make it that far. They'll have a vote on the fast-track trade bill sometime tomorrow morning, as late as 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and then they'll move on to FISA.
And Senator Paul will presumably have a lot more email addresses on his email list and have a lot, you know, greater fundraising opportunities derived from this. But in terms of other material consequence, I think the time is so tight at the end of this session now in terms of, well, the end of this session before their next vacation, wanting to go home for Memorial Day. It will be interesting to see what happens, but we won't know what those consequences will be until he stops talking. Frank Thorpe, NBC News Capitol Hill producer. Thank you, sir. I know it's going to be a long night.
Thank you.
All right, we got lots more ahead on a very busy news night. Please stay with us.